So thank you everyone for joining IvyConnect session. This is our very first event of this new year. So welcome everybody. And for those of you who do not know what IvyCamp is, so we're an initiative by IvyCamp Ventures, basically an alumni IIT and IIM alumni driven platform, a venture capital fund which is based out of Mumbai. What we do at Ivy Camp is we focus on three major areas. One being the institute and alumni engagement, where we actively engage with all the incubators and ESILs. Second being the corporates, where we do corporate innovation programs with them. We do like a lot of POCs. Third being, supporting the founders in different ways, where we connect them to the investment team. We provide mentorship support. So as a part of our engagement, we do IvyConnect programs, and this is one of them. Um, we are doing this in association with ECEL, I am Lucknow, and Student Incubation Center, IIT Delhi. Today we have Raghu, who will be talking about who will be talking about scaling businesses in international markets, with innovating the various business models across. So we would like to keep this session as interactive as possible. The idea is anytime you guys have any doubts, please drop questions in the chat box and we'll take it one by one. Um, Also request everyone to keep yourself muted so that we can have the best out of the session. Raghu, over to you. Requesting you to start the session. Please start with like a small brief, and then we can take it over from there. Yeah.
Thanks, Rupali. Thanks everyone for joining. Appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit of business models, and thanks everyone for taking time from your pressing schedule to spend some time here with me. I hope this session is useful and leaves you back with some insights to take away as you go back. With that, Rupali, can I share my screen? Can it be screen enabled?
Sure. Yeah. Sure. It's enabled. Yeah.
Okay, let me share my screen. I'm still getting disabled participant screen share.
Oh, yeah. Can you check now?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, great.
Can you see the screen?
Yes, we are able to see the screen.
Okay, wonderful. Rupali, if you may, I'll not be looking at any questions coming up on chat, but feel free to stop me anytime, and we can take questions that are put in chat. Is that okay?
Yeah. Sounds good, Raghu. I'll do that. Yes.
Okay. So maybe I'll start as Rupali says, a little bit of my background and where I come from. I did chemical engineering, BTech in IIT Delhi many years ago. Since then, I've been in about 19 years in a variety of roles in corporate. I started in research and development, working on new products and new developments. But what I discovered and what was great about that role was that I was spending as much, if not more, time in selling the product and trying to get funding as I was in trying to develop the product. So it was both exciting, rewarding, as well as challenging. And then I really wanted to understand what is the criteria by which my funding was either increasing or stopping, because I thought I had a great product I was working on and my funding would stop, or I'd be working on a not so great product, my funding would increase. So I really wanted to then get the business side of how the business and finance leaders are making the decisions on funding. So that took me away from research and development and engineering, and I moved to internal audit, which basically means that I lived out of a suitcase, traveled around the world auditing businesses. I started with not knowing how to read financial statements. But I think I learned that if you've kind of gone through engineering, you can learn anything on the job. So I learned finance on the job.
Sorry, requesting everyone to keep yourself muted. Yeah,
So
please
came
carry
off
on.
internal audit after a few years, and I kind of got the role that I was looking for, which is to determine investments in new products. So I was the risk leader when we launched several key products, and it was we had launched a product and we'd sold it to customers all over the world with some very aggressive product guarantees. And then afterwards, we discovered that all those guarantees was leading us to 500,000 exposure to us that we had challenges with. So I had a great opportunity to work with customers around the world to work through all of these guarantees, restructure all the contracts, and make a global product launch very, very smooth. So that was a very fascinating journey. After that, I was sent to Asia to build out the region. Um, we grew the region with a very minimal headcount, and we built capabilities in region. We grew the region more than 3 times. It became our fastest and largest growth region in Asia. And then after that, I moved to supply chain, where I learned how to manage a global supply chain from Asia. So we had a business where we had manufacturing in India and China, engineering in Germany, France, the US, and other parts of the world. And we had to make a decisions on how do we think about our factories, how do we think about engineering, how do we right size our business around the world. So those were, very interesting pieces as we made the business profitable. And in my last 2 roles, I was the digital transformation leader for my business. Digital transformation is often quite a bit of an abused word or used or abused word. It can mean different things to different people.
Right.
But it was an insight into really applying and making data available throughout the business to enable right decision making, enable the right decisions and productivity. And I think in digital transformation, they say most of the digital transformations fail because they focus too much on the technology and not enough on change management. And that was a lesson well learned. We spent 2/3 of our time on change management and 1/3 on technology. And in my latest role as a CFO in APAC, many businesses, including my current business, Aerospace, is having a steep ramp up as we recover post COVID. And so now the focus and the mantra is just growth and growth. So that's what I'm working on right now.
No. Sounds like an exciting journey, Raghu. Yeah, it's very exciting.
Thanks for calling. So I'll start with a little bit on business models, and there's a subject that always gets me very passionate. And I also studied this, quite a bit when I was at Stanford Business School, and I kind of learned a fair bit from there as well. The first step, I think, to think about business models first is to understand. This is probably the easy part. Is to understand. You talk about what game are you playing, like how are you creating value. You could create value in a number of different ways to the customer. You could create value by operational excellence, where you're driving a product with great quality and cost. Walmart is, one that, really revolutionized the whole cost game, where you said save money, live better, a relentless focus on cost. In India, if you think about the automobile sector, Mahindra is the benchmark with what they've done over decades in automobiles with the models they launched and the cost points they were able to hit. But one, intriguing example that comes to my mind for an operational excellence, and this picture is really our famous Mumbai Dabbawalas. They've been profiled all over the world, 99.99% on-time delivery, and they really revolutionized and made that as a niche on how they create value. And many of the best firms will typically be good in at least two things. So I think they've not only good in operational excellence, but I think the Dabbawalas also found a niche and an innovation and a new product they're providing to the customers, which is basically hot home cooked meals for lunches. And that's a niche that they kind of took over and kind of fully control. So that's just a great example of what makes them successful. In terms of product service innovation, I mean, no answers for guessing. In our time, in the last 10, 15 years, many of us would say some of the things that Apple has done, starting with the iPad all the way to the iPhone,
Right.
has been fairly remarkable. So those are the first two categories. The third and fourth categories, if I think about it, it's customer intimacy is really knowing your customer very well inside out. And if you think about kind of all of us when we use Amazon, we've all fed a lot of data to Amazon. They do a lot of what they call A/B testing, which is that does a customer like this or does a customer like that? And they all have pretty detailed analytics on what we do, what we like. They're constantly suggesting. They really up the bar on both customer intimacy and lastly on value chain coordination. Value chain coordination is basically thinking about your entire chain in which value is created across a market and how do you become a coordinator across those. In India, I think Reliance is a good example. Started in trading, then to polyester, and then they went upstream all the way upstream to petrochemicals. So that's the way they started controlling their entire value chain, and they'll continue to do the same probably in all other areas that we're seeing right now, whether that's retail, that's phones. So I think they're a great example on how they abstract value by value chain.
Right.
So this is I would say probably the easy part on what game are you playing. I think the difficult part becomes then how are you really able to capture this value? And it's easy to run a business, run a startup. I was listening to some of the previous talks as well to just grow and sell, but it's harder to grow and sell profitably. And that's where your profit model really becomes your end goal, of where really all the money that the investors have pumped into your venture or your company, when are you going to pay them back? For that, the cost side has to be as aligned as the revenue side as you see. You have your revenue, you have your development costs, you look at your risk, and that's what will give you to your unit economics on how much money you're able to make per unit, and that determines your payback period. One good guidance for the determine that all the value you're creating in step one, if you'll be able to capture it, is to look at this kind of pie chart on the top right, because depending on if your buyers have a lot of power, your suppliers have a lot of power, if you have a lot of threat of entry or you have a lot of competitive rivalries, these will really determine that all the value you're creating, how much you will be able to capture. I'll go you through with an example which will illustrate this a bit more. But the second step is really understanding that you are creating all this value, but will you be able to capture this value?
Right. Raghu, so one thing over here is I think, yeah, example would, help better, but also understanding how to gauge the adaptability or, the need of that market is something, which we could stress more about. Yeah.
Sure. I'll touch upon that. I'm going into an example shortly, so we'll jump more into this topic. And the third thing, which is the third pillar, is really the logic of the business. The logic of the business basically means that how do you make sure your virtuous cycle that if you are profitable and growing today, that you'll continue to be profitable and growing forever or in the future? Are you creating certain strengths as you're growing that will allow us you to continue to be more successful? So if you think about, say, a retail chain, and if I start with the top right, if the retail chain lowers prices, it's going to get higher volume. If it gets higher volume for the inventory that it's buying, it's able to move that inventory faster. And then by moving that faster, it's able to invest in processes and technology, and then it's able to reduce the costs. And because it's able to reduce the cost, again, it can reduce the price more. So you will find in retail, often it's that virtuous cycle that year over year, they're able to do cost that's better than what inflation is doing, because they have this virtuous cycle of constantly reducing prices and generating return, investing and reducing cost. And that becomes a self-perpetuating cycle for retail. Similar, I would say, for any e-commerce platform. Any e-commerce platform is a little bit a chicken and an egg. You need buyers, you need sellers. If you have more sellers, you have better selection, you will have more buyers. Once you have more buyers visiting and more buyers coming, then you'll have more sellers. So you could get to a point very quickly that you don't have one or the other, and your e-commerce platform just crashes, or you start really building one and it leads to the other, and then it becomes a cycle where you have so many hits and so many transactions that this is the platform everybody uses. So that's how then the logic of the business self-perpetuates for a successful e-commerce platform. Okay, to an illustration, I'll take the case of something that I studied and looked at a fair bit. I think now sustainability is is a key priority in businesses. It's no longer a buzzword. Sustainability, green energy. So if you think about it from that side, you look at the macro, the world needs green energy. The cost of electricity for wind energy is now comparable to any fossil fuel, and wind energy farms are proliferating around the world. They're growing high single digits or double digit growth. And you would think that with all of this, the the manufacturers of the wind turbines, or what they're called as OEMs, or original equipment manufacturers, or basically the technology providers, you would think that they would have a very, very robust and profitable business because all the factors seem to be going well for them. The answer, very surprisingly and unfortunately, is no. The reality is, and I'm going to share some screenshots here. You'll see a lot of it if you look at, read business news. Wind turbine makers for the past several years have been losing money. They're not able to price properly. They're losing several billions of dollars. This is an example of Siemens Energy, who disclosed mid last year they're going to take a hit of 4.5 billion, primarily due to wind. So it kind of makes you wonder, why is it that when the macro is so good, the market is so good, the world needs energy, these guys are providing it, why would they be losing money? A few answers comes to mind as you think about the framework I spoke about. The first is, let's talk about the customers for these technology providers. The customers are the independent power producers. When a wind farm comes up, there are four pillars, so to say. You have to develop the wind farm, which means you get land, you secure permits, you secure a power purchase agreement. Then you construct, you build a wind farm, you contract with the manufacturer, you build it up. Then you operate the assets, you sell the power, or you can choose to also own the asset, for which you'll have to raise capital and financing to make sure you own the asset as well. Now, what's happened is that if you look at some of the logos that I pasted on the right, this is a little bit of a different scenario than India, where utility companies are struggling in India, but abroad, many of these utility companies with large wind portfolios, they are extremely profitable and cash rich. Several of them make between 800 million to over $3 to $4 billion. And you would wonder why, but again, they've done a little bit of what Reliance did many years ago and continues to do. They started at one side of the equation, whether they were owning assets or they were developing assets. And then they integrated backwards and forwards through the entire value chain between developing, constructing, operating, and owning. And then they controlled the full value chain of energy. And therefore, then they started squeezing the technology providers, because then they got so much buyer power by owning and managing and getting the full, capturing all the value from a value chain standpoint. So that is one main reason on how by forward and backward integration, they are capturing most of the value and profit that's generated in the industry. So then this is what it has led to for then the customer. Is I go back into the aspect of the logic of the business. Now, if you look at this flow chart, what they're doing then is they started with owning the asset and selling power profitably. Then they invested to expand upstream in development, wind farm development. Then they also invested to expand upstream and downstream capabilities, putting more digital AI on the wind farm assets, getting more value from there. Then they became more profitable. Now they become more profitable. They have more scale and more money to squeeze the suppliers and build barriers for entry. And therefore, then they will continue to expand some more. So again, for them, it became a virtuous cycle of capturing all the value the industry is doing and commoditizing the technology providers by fully owning the wing-to-wing value chain. So that's a little bit, that's what happened in wind energy. So then from a technology provider standpoint, and Rupali, to answer your question, now if you look at this framework of PI, what this led to is your buyer power is high, which means your customers, which we just spoke about, they're owning the full value chain. So the power of them is very high. You have four
Right.
market players going gung ho on trying to win these contracts. So the rivalry is very high. The threat of entry in terms of a new participant coming is probably medium, but then supplier power is also very high. You may have read over the past few years after COVID that there's been many disruptions in the supply chain, and a lot of commodity prices have kind of gone through the roof, like steel, etc. And all of those led to the fact that the technology provider is kind of holding the baby and the bathwater, because the suppliers are now charging more, the customers are squeezing the technology provider. So the technology provider got squeezed from both sides, and they're creating a lot of value, but they're not able to capture.
Right. Raghu, so one question I have over here is like I'm very curious to know if they did it all alone or they had like some partners supporting them in this business, right? Like this whole expansion. Uh,
So I think in terms of key partners to support the expansion, you mean for the customers?
no, for the business.
Okay. Yeah. So
Yeah.
the in terms of the buyers, the key partners that were supporting them were the banks, because they wanted to get the return on investment fast, and therefore the power producers were the fastest way to get the value. So that's how it's the banks, it's the customers, the power producers, and the technology provider was a little bit stuck in between, not having a real good partner in this chain to help them be more profitable.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
I'll then jump to a little bit, the business model innovations that I got to see as in my organization, which is GE. GE started about 100 years ago, or more than 100 years ago, with Edison and the light bulb. And therefore, you would think that what a GE is famous for would be its technology, which it is. Across many industries, many products and services of GE are used all over the world, and that's what's kept the company in the forefront. But I want to touch upon a less spoken part of the success of the company, which is really the business models. If you hear a lot of venture capital companies, one of the mantras they say that as a startup founder, we are so much focused and passionate about a technology, we little bit lose sight of the sustainability of the business model. And a lot of venture funds will say that you may or may not succeed when you have a technology disruption, but if you have
So,
a business model innovation, you will definitely succeed. So that is a much more surer mantra to make sure they'll get the return, and the startup will do well. So with that, I'll touch upon a few examples of business model innovations I saw over the course of several years in GE. Let's start with the story on Genpact. I think sometime in the middle 90s, over a conversation that happened at senior levels of the Indian government, we had a large GE arm for GE Capital, which included a credit card business. So we started in 1997 with a small office to answer emails and mails from these credit card customers. That was started as a small arm called Checkis. Over the course of a few years, that became so popular, it grew an organization of 17,000 people. And then it started several other customers, and many other multinational companies, whether it's Dell, whether it's American Express, everyone followed suit. And shared services or outsourcing or call centers, that everything that you see in India now, which is still an active business philosophy, really started out of this decision in 1997. So that's what led to the outsourcing boom. And I think with all of this, it's worked and it's still sustainable, not just because it's been a good cost play, but also because the quality of what we got in India was so good. So it was both cost and quality that kept and made the shared services model work, and it still works after 25 years that the model started. And similar example is, I would say, in terms of our partnership with Wipro. As a result of our discussions with Azim Premji back in the day, we partnered with Wipro to build a low-cost ultrasound machine. And afterwards, we asked them to write software for the machines we were building. But slowly, one thing led to the other. And then after Wipro, we engaged TCS. After that, we engaged Infosys. And we had so much software needs that contracts with GE at one point of time, especially when these companies were fledgling and growing, drove between 20 to 50% of the revenues. And we were our first largest international customer for the big three. And so a lot of the IT boom that happened subsequent goes back a little bit to this decision in the mid 90s. The second related I would share as a business model innovation that took place was, if some of you have been to Bangalore and visited Whitefield, Whitefield is the Whitefield area in Bangalore is a large tech hub right now. You'll see a plethora of IT parks, malls, now a metro. So many Fortune 500 companies are stationed there. Back in 2000, we took a leap of faith to open an engineering center there. And all of Whitefield was a farmland. We were like the only building for miles when we launched it in 2000. And everyone was not sure why we were doing this investment. But what we learned very quickly was that as we are looking to expand globally, you cannot just go to all of these regions as trying to open sales offices. Every country wants to have capabilities built in country for country. In Make in India, it's true everywhere around the world. Everybody wants things to be made in India if you're growing in India. So we took a leap of faith that to do well in India, and if we've done so well on software, we've done so well in call centers, that maybe India's engineers are fantastic as well. And that's when this center was conceived and put together. It's called the John F. Feld Center in Whitefield, Bangalore. And I spent 4 years in the center. At the beginning, it was had a lot of challenges to doing real high hardcore technology in the center, because there was time zone differences with America, there were credibility gaps, there were technology gaps. But what I discovered that the teams were hungry to do well. There were a lot of PhDs as well who came back from the US to work in this center. And with all of the work and the ideas that came out of the Bangalore center, slowly but surely, the quality of work that and the products that the center was building kept on upskilling and upskilling. If you ever now, therefore, if I give just two examples, if you ever take a 16-hour direct flight on the Boeing 777, know that a lot of the design of this engine and design and engineering was done out of this center in Whitefield. So that's a matter of great pride. And to date, this center has had 4,000 patents. It's designed new products that were designed here, then went globally, went all over the world. Like the first ultra portable ECG called the Mac 400 was designed and conceived at a lower cost in this center, and then is now sold all over the world. So that's an example. Again, I would say it's more, again, even though it's a technology story, it's a business model innovation of a company that took a chance, and for a lower cost, got amazing engineering talent out of India. The title of this talk was Entering New Markets. So, in that spirit, I'll kind of continue. If I think about launching a new product,
Guys, please keep yourself muted. Oh, yeah.
okay. If you think about globalization and entering new markets, especially in the context of a B2B, I think there are two scenarios you'll often run into, and I run into both for several years. One is you desperately need a proof of concept validation, which means you need one customer, one credible, well-known customer to take a chance with you on a new product. And and then once you get that first customer, the second customer and the third customer is very easy because you have a reference. You can show that the product works. So getting that first customer is the hardest part, what we learned. And many a time, our learning has been that even if that first customer is getting that product for free, it's almost totally worth it because you desperately need to see how the new product performs, and you desperately need the validation and credibility of a new customer. So that's one route we have had to take again and again and again. We've had to do proof of concepts, pilots with reputed customers. We've taken a hit, we've lost money, but then eventually it's allowed us to bulletproof the business case and sell it around the world. That's approach one. The approach two we've had to take was when we already had an acceptance of the product, we've taken out a product risk with guarantees. Then you just have to go sell as much as you can. And then afterwards, you don't know how well the product will work longer term. Then you got to be prepared to problem solve gaps. You will have to continue fine tuning the product, whether it's hardware or software, keep on fixing, upgrading. Growing up pains will happen for months and months and months after you launch the product. But you just have to stay on top, fixing it with a lot of intensity, and find a way to somehow assuage the customer and restructure contracts and give them other carrots to keep them going. So these were the two approaches that I've experienced over many years. That either you give a product for free and you secure first customer, or you take big chances with your product and be ready to problem solve after.
Right. So we have one question from Abhishek. His question is that how can early stage founders leverage tech effectively?
Can you repeat the question, Rupali?
Yeah, it's how can early stage founders leverage tech effectively?
Early stage founders leverage tech effectively when they have a tech product.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
I think from an early stage founders, what comes to my mind in terms of leveraging tech is kind of twofold. You can leverage tech to make sure that, assuming I'm understanding this question right, you can really leverage tech to understand and go after your market. This is something as a facility that did not exist many years ago. But now with tech, you have a very good sense of where your market is. You have the information on where your customers are. You have an idea of how much the customer is transacting on the kind of products or services you're providing in tech. So to me, the greatest value that brings from in terms of leveraging tech is to know what is the size of the market and which key customers you need to go after.
Uh, Abhishek, I hope your question is answered. Thank you, Raghu. I think we can move to the next slide. Yeah. And
And
guys, meanwhile, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat box.
And as far as entering new markets is concerned, I was working as a consultant with a tech company that was looking to launch in the US, but it's a far bigger market than most other places. And this is, I would say, that the second half of this slide is kind of what's the nitty-gritties you will need to enter a new market. Yes, you have a great product, you're focused on your sales, all of that is fine, but this is the kind of the hidden factory that you need to enter a new market. If you're going to transact with, say, an American customer, the first thing you need to figure out, for instance, is that are you transacting offshore or onshore? What transacting offshore means, you're trying to directly work and have customer contracts with your office entity in India with an entity in the US. which is the customer entity. So you're selling directly offshore. In some cases that works. In many cases that does not work, because you're doing some work in country as well, for which you will have to create an onshore contract. If you're creating an onshore contract, you'll have to create a new legal entity in that country you want to enter. And so you will need help from legal. Every country is constantly increasing and complexifying their tax laws. You need support from tax, both direct and indirect. If by any chance your customers government could be a key customer in the market you're entering, you need working with government experience, you need market development, and then you're operating in that country, then you'll all have the nitty-gritties of needing basic finance. You need to open bank accounts, you'll have to move money in and out, you need some experience in treasury. So this is the thing that I've seen, very often in our excitement and exuberance entering new market. All of this stuff kind of gets left for too late. So my advice and suggestion to all of you is that as and when this becomes applicable, these are the nitty-gritties you need to be well aware of, and these are the bare minimum capabilities you'll have to hire for, like legal and tax and finance and treasury, to operate in any new market. Certainly they'll come with a share of cost, but it's the price of doing business.
Right. Raghu, so just a question over here. How much time approximately does it take to enter into a new market? Right.
Let's look. I think that it depends on how fast does it take you to get into a new customer. We were trying to enter a new market in Indonesia many years ago, and it took us about close to a year. Close
Wow.
to a year, where 6 months where we worked with a customer to make sure we had a product that the customer wanted and transacted with that customer. And then another 6 months building all of these things. We had to build onshore as well, so that took time. So that is once where we do it. Indonesia was 1 year. We've entered then new markets. The fastest I've seen it is somewhere between 3 to 6 months. That is the fastest I've seen. But you got to be prepared for the long haul. And I think everything comes down
Right.
to having I think the faster it can move is if you have a relationship with the customer, or you get great market development people who have relations with the customers. So getting that first customer and entering that new market can make the process go slower, or the process go faster.
And how about the research work which goes along, right? Like before the launch.
Yes, the research work, I think it will basically be you have to do a lot of discussions with the customer prior to the launch. So I think it's really ideal and best that as you're working with the customer, work with the customer more as partners and core developers. That would be kind of very successful in the sense that they'll give you real-time feedback on whether there's a software or a product and what they like or what they don't like. And then,
Right.
just be agile, iterative, turn it around fast. But I would really advocate for a customer as a partner approach.
Right. Okay. Right. Great. Raghu, so we have two questions. Can we pick them now?
Sure.
Okay. So we have one from Rahul. He's asking how could one solve for the challenge in adjusting business models for different markets?
I think, Rahul, what I would say is that stick to a business model framework. I mean, there is one framework I spoke about, which is how are you creating value? How do you think you'll capture value? And what do you think is the logic of the business? So that I would suggest is a good framework to think about. So if you think of moving to a new segment, creating value, I guess, should be very clear to you in your head. Then look at, will you be able to capture the value? So that framework of, are they competitors? The suppliers have a lot of power? Do buyers have a lot of power? Are you able to be able to capture all this value? That's the second step. And then just try to lay out sequentially and logically that you feel that as you become a little bit poised for success, you have competitive differentiation to keep that success story going forever. So that step 1 to 3, I think, is if I go back to some of my earlier slides, is true across industries, um, whether it's B2B or B2C. I think it's a robust enough framework that you can try and apply.
Right. Um, Rahul, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to drop it on the in the chat box. We have one from Nisha. Nisha's asking how to evaluate a business model with respect to a global context, specifically now after the pandemic.
Business model in a global context. I mean, there's two things that have changed in the business model after the pandemic. One is there is even more reliance on trying to do in country. So some of the things that used to be done offshore, countries are even more trying to do in-house. So that I would say that's one. And second, related to that there has been a disruption in supply chains. For a long time in supply chains used to work with China as the global supplier, and everyone is trying to pick alternatives because they're worried about the resilience of supply chains, and that's where I think India is also taking the opportunity to ramp up in electronics and many other fields. So those are the two changes how I've seen business models change. Countries have gone more inward looking, and at the same time countries are looking for diversification of technologies, diversification of suppliers. They do not want to put all the eggs in one basket because they're scared of the experience they had with COVID.
Right. Thank you, Raghu.
Any other questions on the chat?
None for now. I think we can proceed.
Okay, so that's growth. This slide, I would say, for your investors or for your business, or you work in an organization, at the end of the day, every business needs the word is predictable. They need a stream of cash flows. They want to be able to see that you'll be able to make good cash or good money from this, or in a very predictable way. You don't want to have stretches where you make money, stretches you lose money. That really does not work for investors. I mean, everyone wants predictability, that you're profitable and you make cash. And if you look at, if I just take an example in tech, this is something I picked up from a few months ago, that Apple, most profitable line of business has been, and it's something we don't appreciate as much. It's services. It's not the phone. It's all the services that come after, whether that's Apple Pay, that's iOS, and all the other revenues that it gets as services from as a subscription model. Apple as well potentially doesn't make as much money selling the phone as the aftermarket services. So one key thing to note here is if you look at the second last line here, and it may be a little bit small, let me make it bigger. That's the second last line here. You will see here, second last line says the margin for services is 70.5%. It's almost double the 35% margin for all of Apple's hardware products. So yes,
Right.
we get excited about the technology and the product, and that's all sexy. But where Apple makes the most money is again aftermarket services. So if you are a software as a service, then that's great. You're already sorted because you're offering us services. Hopefully, it gives you predictable cash flow. But if you're not, if you're creating assets, then you need to figure out how will you have a predictable stream of cash flows. And one typical way is through a services model. Now, me in engines and aerospace, what we do is, let's say we have engines, and it's an Indigo flight between, say, Delhi to Lucknow. So the way it works is that after maybe 4,000 flights between Delhi to Lucknow, the engine needs repair and maintenance. And after a while, the airlines concluded that this is too much headache for us. That what if we have need maintenance and service when the engine is up in the air, or we're not ready, etc., etc. So then they gave it to us, and we said that we're going to pay you a flat fare, So they pay the technology providers like GE Aerospace a flat, say, dollars per flight hour. So for every hour they fly, they pay a flat amount to the technology provider, whether it be Rolls-Royce or Pratt or GE, and the company takes care, and that's an insurance product. All of the maintenance is a headache of the company. So it works both ways. For us, it enables us to have a predictable stream of cash flow, which is what investors, which is what we want, because engines sales can go up and down, but this gives us a profitable stream of cash flows. We know when an engine is going to come for repair, overall, when we're going to make money, and by paying us dollar for every hour we fly, we have a continuous stream of cash flows that we can forecast, predict, and keep our business running. So that's been, over the past few decades, a real game changer in terms of the business model for aerospace, where we sell the engines, and we offer this insurance product. It's called a contractual service agreement, or a CSA, as it's called across the industry. And we take care, we give them an insurance product. They pay a flat fare, and we take care of all the engine maintenance needs. It's completely our headache. So this has been a tremendous business model innovation in the aerospace sector that's really worked well for customers, and it's really worked well for us. So services, I would say, if you're not a software as a service, services is really, really something you got to think through, because every business needs cash all the time. And this is the most easiest and most common way on how you get cash. Almost winding up here. I'll touch upon a couple more pages. We get so excited and following up on growth. I mean, that's the main thing we look at, growth of products, services. The thing we miss often is that is expansion of margin, because for investors, besides sales growth, the thing that they care more about is that how profitable are you going to be. If you're a 10% profit business, are you going to be a 15% profit business? If you're 15%, are you going to be a 25% profit business? That's how you value the company. End of the day, the valuation models are based on the metric they call the free cash flow. So it really comes down to profitability and the growth of that profitability. And I want to share a story of when I took over as the supply chain CFO for power. And we were making these large power plants. We found that we had better technology than low cost producers, but customer willingness to pay did not fully offset the cost. They were not willing to pay us the premium for the better technology we had. So we had to drive out costs pretty hard. Over 24 months, we reduced cost by 21%. We looked at every line item of cost. I'll probably share a story that I had to go to China to negotiate with a supplier for steel. And of course, the supplier only spoke Mandarin or Chinese, as you say. Of course, I don't speak it. And we were sitting over and decided, thinking about how do we communicate, how do we negotiate. Then I asked them a question that, can we do anything in the product design to make it easier for you to manufacture the steel as we want it? And they suddenly got super excited, and their entire team, they came down with boards. They started drawing boards in front of me saying, look, this is your design, why don't you do this, why don't you do this, why don't you do this? And then there was a translator translating all of that to me. And we got 15% cost out by changing our design, working in partnership with suppliers. So it's a lesson learned that in this environment, say you're a tech startup, the cost for data scientists is going through the roof, right? The people you need to hire is all becoming very expensive. So you need to have a relentless focus on cost and productivity, because eventually that's what your investors care about. And you should, my lesson from all of this, continue to look at everybody as a partner. I spoke answering a previous question about how we should look at a customer as a partner, look also as a supplier as a partner. And I guess together you can find better solutions that you could have found by yourself. Is there a
Yeah, we
question?
have one. Yeah, we have a question. We'll take it in the end. I think we'll finish the slides.
Last slide. I'm just going to wrap up here. Um, you will hear and read a lot about lingos on management philosophies. Three lingos that I've read a lot about will be lean, agile, and design thinking. Lean started over 100 years ago with Henry Ford, and then Toyota. It was very much manufacturing focused. Design thinking started with this gentleman called Herbert Simon and popularized by the Stanford School of Design. And Agile started in 2000 after a meeting of 17 software thought leaders. So it's always kind of confusing in terms of why are these different models? What's a good model for my firm? Because even if you are, a 15-member startup, what you need very clearly is a discipline on what you need to do. What is the philosophy in which you operate? How do you interact with your employees? How do you interact with the customers? How do you work with them? How do you refine your product? So at any scale, you need a philosophy which you work your organization through. And these are kind of the four principles that I distill, kind of looking at all of these three principles and applying several of these philosophies. One is we tend to jump to solutions. Don't jump to solutions. You need to spend a lot of time observing and understanding the problem. Do not create the perfect solution. Try to create, incremental improvements or prototypes. Don't expend effort for the perfect solution. That perfect solution does not exist. And in the same spirit, continuously problem solve with customers or users based on a KPI measurement and continuously try to get better. And lastly, a culture of teamwork and collaboration is a hierarchy. If you read about literature of all three of these philosophies, you will find if you kind of crystallize all of it, it comes down to these four principles. So you may hear different lingos. I will just finally say that pick one, go with it, because you need a philosophy on how you operate your company. And these four are just simple principles to go by. That's my last slide. I can take any further questions. I know we are a little bit over time.
Yeah, we have just like two questions in the chat box. So one we have from GK. He's asking how to optimize resources allocation for global expansion. Should first-time founders think about it from day one? Okay.
Let me.
Yeah.
I think first-time founders should think about it from day one, absolutely, because you have a business plan and a business model on what you're looking for. You should have a line of sight to when you want to expand, which markets you want to go after. So we should start thinking about it from day one, because as I said, this takes time. And then in terms of optimizing resource allocation, I would kind of lean towards some of the things that I've spoken about on this slide. I think development and R&D in India has really taken off. And what you want to keep in, especially if you're entering high cost markets, you want to keep your trim, your high cost, and you want to look at the basic minimum you want to survive and get your first customers in those regions, whether it's market development, sales, marketing. So start small, start with a few basic resources on sales and marketing when you're expanding globally, and where you think you're getting traction, getting your first contract, your first customer, start putting the other pieces of the capabilities you need of finance and legal and tax, and that's how you'll slowly get into a sustainable growing business. But I would start day one and start small with maybe one sales or one marketing person in the market you want to reach.
Right. Yeah, we have one last question. So this is an interesting question where, we talk about what we should do, but I think this question highlights that, what we should not do. So the question is, are there any pitfalls or common mistakes you would caution entrepreneurs to avoid during the international scaling process?
The pitfalls which kind of I put was also based on the mistakes that we have made. I would say, for instance, I should just give you one example. Tax compliance keeps on getting more and more difficult. And jurisdictions continuously update and upgrade the rules. And you could very easily and quickly be in a lot of trouble from a tax compliance standpoint. So
Right.
I would say invest in, say, for instance, if one thing comes to mind, invest in a very strong legal person, because you don't know the issues you may run into in a new country, and invest in a really good tax person. Those are the two things that I would highlight, because first of all, what you need is safety and security of the business you're running, and the growth can come, but you need to be safe and secure. You need to be compliant in the region you operate. So getting a solid legal and a solid tax person, I would strongly recommend. If you don't do that, you're going to run into issues. So those are the mistakes we have.
Yeah, great. So Uday, I hope your question is answered. Raghu, yes, so we are we're out with questions. Anything on the closing note? Just
No,
take like
thank you
two
so
more
much
minutes to wrap
for
up.
your time. Happy New Year. Hope some of this is useful to you as you think about your ventures. And good luck. And again, Rupali, if anyone wants to reach me offline and run by some things by me, happy to. But this was a great session, and thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Raghu. Thank you so much for making time and joining us today. Definitely a very insightful session. And thank you everyone for joining. We'll stay in touch. So if there's anything that just drop a note at rupali@ivcamp.in, and then I'll pass it on to Raghu. Great.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you everyone. Bye bye.